Hello and welcome. Today's video, I continue our road trip series where we go in our 2015 Tesla Model S 85D from the Salt Lake City, Utah area to the Orlando, Florida area. And I'm covering each travel day of this trip. And today's video is number 10 in the series. So if you're interested in seeing any of the prior days, feel free to click on this card that'll pop out right there and you'll see the playlist for all of the prior videos. In this video, we are actually on New Year's Day of 2020, and we are in Temple, Texas, staying at a friend's house. And so we're going to start out this video today actually going into the day before the travel video. So I'm cheating a little bit on today's video, but I just wanted to show a little bit of some adventure that we went on that day. And then we'll get into the rest of the video. So we obviously don't need gasoline, but we're going to go check out Buc-ee's, which is apparently a large, popular, I'm not really sure what yet, but retail gas station place, rest stop here in Texas. So we're in Temple, Texas right now. And we're getting the kids out of the car and we're gonna go check it out. Lydia, show me your excitement.
And this is still the smallest. The one that...
So it turns out Buc-ee's is huge. I have never been in a gas station before that was this large, had this much going on, and this many people in it all at the same time. This is pretty epic for a convenience store slash gas station. Pickled quail eggs. Where have you been my whole life? Spicy pickled eggs. They have quite the product selection here.
Except when we were a baby.
Looking at the Teslafy data for January 1st, we were just hanging out at our friend's house all day, except for a couple of outings that we did, and I gave them some rides in the Tesla, of course. So that's what these trips are here. You'll notice that the efficiency is fairly low on each of these because the car was cold when we got in and it was heating up the cabin, and we didn't drive very far, so it's hard for it to be efficient. And then also I was doing some spirited starts with giving my friends rides, so that didn't help the efficiency either. And then down here we charged the car. You can see I started it at 12:42 a.m. So that's probably when I went to bed that day because of New Year's Day celebrations, right? And I told it to just go ahead and charge to 100% because we were going to be leaving first thing the next morning, and it finished that and was ready for us to go. You'll see over here that we were charging at 24 amps, and that's because we were plugged into a NEMA 1430 outlet, which means it's a 30 amp circuit at 240 volts. And you're only supposed to pull a continuous load at 80% of a circuit. So that's why it's 24 amps, and I set the car to that manually. And over here, you can see its voltage, actually, the average was 245 volts, so a little bit higher than what it's normally rated for. And then if we look over here for the cumulative statistics for the whole day, there's a couple of miscellaneous stats up here, but down here you can see we only drove 32 miles for the entire day, but we used up 45 rated miles. So it was an efficiency for the day of 70% on average, or I guess 71% if we want to round up. And we drove for 49 minutes total throughout all of those trips. And then down here, that one travel charge, it added 24 kilowatt hours. And like I had said before, our friends were just happy to have us come visit, and they didn't want us to pay them for the electricity, even though I offered and told them I could tell how much I was charging, so I could pay them if they'd wanted me to, but they said no, they were happy to have us visit. So that's the details for this non-travel day. Okay, so that was just some fun checking out some local things there. So now today we're going to get into the actual travel day of going from Temple, Texas to El Paso, Texas. And so this is going to be an interesting day. It's a long day of a lot of charging, and that is primarily because of the wind. We had way more headwind on this than I've ever experienced before. And so let's get into it and you'll see us discover that. All right, we are back in the car. Today we're going to be going from Temple, Texas to El Paso, Texas. So we're going to be spending a number of hours in the car just driving through Texas. Hey! So, in any case, it'll be about a 11.5-hour day, and we're expecting, no, a little bit quieter. We're expecting to spend another probably hour. What we found is we need about another hour on a long day like this just for inefficiencies. So we're expecting to pull in about 12.5 hours from now. And right now it's 7:42 a.m. Central Time, and we're going to be getting to Mountain Time where we're going. So, in any case, we'll probably pull in at, I don't know if I'm doing the math right, but 8:30 or 9 p.m. Mountain Time, I think is the plan. Anyway, we'll get there when we get there. So, we have charged up the car fully, and you can see here, well, it's fully, but it's been having the heater on for a little bit, so we're at 98%. This is the route we're going to be taking, leaving from here and going to Junction, Texas, and then continuing down. So this is estimating an 11-hour and 17-minute drive. So we're going to go ahead and say begin trip, and we're going to get started on the first leg of our journey today. Girls, are you excited? Here's an update for you. We are approaching Junction, Texas, Junction, Texas. You can see we are 8 minutes away, and we're gonna get there with 5% battery. We're currently at 6%, and you can see over here our power is limited because we're coming in with a lower state of charge. So we'll be there in just a couple of minutes. Testify shows that for that segment of the trip, we drove 95% of our battery. So that's, and we started, if you remember, at 98%, and then we arrived at 3%. So that does make sense. And that's a lot of the battery. We don't normally do that. But we drove for 2 hours and 37 minutes and drove for 174 miles, which, if you'll remember, when we were fully charged, the rated capacity is around 255 miles. But rated is for 300 watt hours per mile. And if we look over here, we were actually using up 428 watt hours per mile. And so we were driving at 70.7% efficiency. I have generally found that at highway speeds like we were going, 80 to 85% efficiency is fairly common. Another big reason for the difference and for the extreme inefficiency is the wind. If you look over here, you can see it's showing a 7.8 mile per hour wind, which this doesn't show you what direction the wind is going, but I'm going to tell you it was a headwind. And so that is actually a big part of that we hadn't really picked up yet on in the day. But you'll notice if you look down here, each of the segments of the trip shows a headwind, and it gets stronger down here, and that'll come up later. We just arrived and backed into our spot at 3% battery. So we're here in Junction, Texas, and we'll be charging for 35 minutes, it looks like. And so, yeah, that was a little bit closer than we expected to get here. We were expecting probably closer to 5 or 6% most of the way. But there at the end, I was passing some people, and it used up some extra energy. So I'm not terribly surprised. So we're gonna get plugged in and take a break. Being that we're so low on the battery, this should be getting up to 130 kilowatts in theory if the charging station can deliver it. Oh, we're getting so close. Oh, 125. 126 it looks like is what we're gonna peak at. Oh, it's still trying. Oh, I settled too soon. Look at that. 129. Come on. One more. The most I've ever seen this car get is 131. Alright, well, we did our best. We tried. 129. So So yeah, look at that. You can see this red line is already thicker. You can see we've already gained 2% battery. So yeah, you know, I look at this charge rate and I think about like the Model 3, for instance, and how it can stay at a much higher sustained charge rate for even longer. And I look forward to having that fast charge rate someday in a newer car. We've been here for just a couple of minutes. It's 10:43 now, and we've gotten 22 kilowatt hours already, and we're down to 77 kilowatt charge rate and 32% battery. Okay, we're gonna have a race. Ready, Lydia? No? All right, well, Lucy's gonna race. Get set, go. Oh. You can do it. How was that race? Whoa, that's enthusiastic.
Okay, Daddy, let's go race.
Okay, first we have to watch for cars. Okay, this line. Okay, we got our feet on the line. On your mark. Oh, there's a truck. Wait for it. Wait for it. Okay, go. See if the camera can keep up. Oh, you did. What did you think? You ready to go again?
Yes!
Okay. Let's go a different direction. Go! Don't trip on the rocks. Oh, whew. Good job. Give me 5. There you go. Give me 5, Lydia. Yeah. Oh yeah. Good job. You're breathing real hard. Yeah. What, Lydia? Okay. We're doing a quick charger update. Looks like we're at 55 kilowatts, 48%, estimated 15 minutes to go. All right, we're getting the kids loaded up. We're at 62% battery. It estimates 5 minutes. It's estimating that we'll arrive at 10%, which is our threshold, now 11%. So we're gonna get out of here. The girls had fun running around, getting their exercise in. They got a snack, and now we're gonna get going again. This leg of the journey should be an hour and 13-minute drive. So not terribly long on this stint. All right, let's go. Teslafy shows that we started charging at 10% up here, but we had arrived at 3%, and so it must have regained its data connection when we were up to 10% battery already. So take these stats with a grain of salt. We may be missing out on a couple of minutes worth of data here, so 36 minutes, I don't know that it would have started keeping track of it if it didn't have a data connection. I'm not sure if it works retroactively or not. In any case, these are the stats for our charging session. We were not there for terribly long, and then we got back on the road.
The faint smell of seaweed that still clung to it made him think of the sea and oysters and pearl divers and giant clams. He had on his aqualung and was at the bottom of the ocean.
What I found worked pretty well is the kids liked to listen to audiobooks, and so as we were cruising along, the girls were doing that, and I had wireless headphones in that I could be listening to my own podcasts, and so it's a nice way to be able to isolate the sound, and so you can be listening to different things while you're driving. The drive from Junction, Texas to Ozona, Texas took an hour and 5 minutes, and we drove 91 miles, and at a whopping 62.7% efficiency, which is really low efficiency. 483 watt-hours per mile is way above the 300 watt-hours per mile this car is rated for. However, at freeway speeds, we were going about average of 84 miles per hour. That's still a low efficiency. I'd say 80%, or yeah, 80% efficiency, maybe 75 is a little bit more common. We do have some elevation gain here going on, but really the biggest difference is probably the headwind that we are going into over here. All right, we've arrived in Ozona, Texas, and we're at 7%. I went a little faster than I normally do, and so we lost a little bit of excess energy that we had estimated to have. So we'll be here for 55 minutes at their estimation. I'll show you in a second, but on the supercharger map, it showed that there was a supercharger offline, and that's why we're having to charge here for longer than we normally would. Looking at the charging rate, oh, look at that, we're at 130 kilowatts. Excellent. So we're going to go and explore. This Dairy Queen is the closest place we could find to eat to the supercharger, and it was still like a 7-minute walk. So we're gonna head in here for lunch.
Hi, Mommy. On your mark. Get set. Go.
Lunch is done. The car estimates about 10 more minutes, so we're heading back to the car. And then we'll get back on the road. The walk over here was a bit of a seedy walk. I'll show you some pieces of it as we go back. Not the greatest supercharger location. You can see where we're heading as I walk over here through this gap. We have to walk across this open field area and then go down a narrow alley out to that way. What do you think, Lydia? Is this a fun walk?
Yeah.
So at least it gets us out exercising between drives, but I don't particularly love where we're having to walk to this route. Alright, we're almost done walking back to the car. Ironically, we have a Model X over there just pulling out of the hotel parking lot. They were the people that we had talked with at the last supercharger station. I found this a couple of times on this trip and other trips where you have these supercharger buddies that you just happen to sync up with other Teslas, and you stop at the same superchargers for overlapping amounts of time. Usually it only happens for 2, maybe 3 superchargers before you get out of sync. Somebody's faster than the other, and then you don't see them again. This is the Quality Inn that this supercharger is behind. Alright, we're getting back to the car. I'm going to check on the charge state, and I'll show you, and then we'll get going. Alright, we are showing 84% battery, 10 minutes remaining. We're down to 28 kilowatts. If we look here at our plan, we can see that we're going to the Pecos supercharger. Right now it's estimating that we'll arrive with 6%. We always wait until that arrival percentage is 10% before we unplug and go. So just a couple of minutes left, but we're going to get the kids in their car seats. That usually takes a couple minutes anyway, and then the car will probably be ready to go by then. Alright, it's estimating 10%, and I wanted to point out here just a little example of a disadvantage of a Tesla right now. Because there is that supercharger right here that I pointed out earlier that's out of order, it is having to reroute us up over here to this Pecos supercharger, whatever that is. Yeah, Pecos, Texas. And so then we'll come over here. But otherwise, we would just be heading straight across here on the Interstate 10. But we're going to have to go up and then back down because of the Fort Stockton supercharger being out. And again, I can show you that here. You see there's a supercharger right there. But when you tap on it, it says temporary closure. So, I mean, this is just the limitation of early adopters with technology where there's not, you know, superchargers just ubiquitous everywhere like there are gas stations, and so we're limited in our options and had to, the car has to reroute us a little bit in this case. So, yeah, let's get started. Oh, actually, I was going to point out the battery is at 89%, and we can see over here that 21 kilowatts is what we're down to, which is way slower than I usually like to be. I usually stop at around 50 kilowatts, but we needed to go farther, so this was necessary. But luckily we're all fed, and everyone's had their breaks, and so hopefully we'll be able to go for a good couple of hours and have the kids asleep for a while. At least one can hope, right? The Ozona supercharging stop lasted for an hour and 15 minutes, which is a lot longer than our normal charging stop, but it was needful to get to the next supercharger. And luckily, because it lined up with lunchtime, it wasn't a big deal to walk over and take a leisurely lunch break. So we went from 7% to 89% and added 61.58 kilowatt hours to the battery. And here's some other supercharger stats if you're interested. So it's looking like this leg of the journey is going to be a little bit more of a miss than just the supercharger being closed and us having to charge extra at the last stop. We're having to go fairly slow. I've been watching the arrival percentage, and it has been at 10, and it has been lowering and got to 5, and then it has said a couple of times that you must, go below 70 miles per hour to reach your destination, and then 65. And I've been slowing down slowly until finally I just gave up, and I'm like, I'm just gonna go really slow and get myself some buffer back. So we're now drafting behind a motorhome, and over here I've got my follow distance set to 1 so that I'm as close to it as autopilot will get. And we're going 55 apparently in an 80, so not lovely, but at least there is a passing lane, so it's easy for everyone else to just go flying by. I don't normally have to do this. This is only like the second or third, probably second time that I've had to do this kind of driving in this Tesla. I think that part of this is probably caused due to a headwind. I didn't look up the wind ahead of time, and we weren't experiencing a headwind prior, but now we are. And as you maybe saw, there's a little bit of rain on the windshield. It rained a little bit, but not enough to affect the range, I don't think. So at this point we're down to 52% battery. It's still estimating 5% arrival. We still have 93 miles to go. So I'm just going to keep drafting this guy for a little while until that percentage maybe starts to climb up. Hopefully it does. We're going to be exiting off of Interstate 10 in looks like 43 more miles, and then that's going to be not on a freeway anyway, so we'll be going slower. I'm not concerned about reaching our destination as long as you follow the advice sooner. Then you can always still get to your destination. You just may not get there with the average speed limit that you had hoped for. I was planning on going 80 or 75 this whole way, so this is kind of a bummer. But yeah, that's sometimes what happens. It's working. You can see we're still drafting this motorhome, but we're up to 7%. So we just gotta hang in there, be patient for a few more minutes. I don't know exactly what percentage I'm willing to pass this guy, but we're gonna have to still continue going slow regardless, so I'm just gonna stay here for a little while longer. What do you think, girls? Yeah? What are you saying yeah to? Yeah, okay. We've only been drafting this motorhome guy for another couple of minutes, like 2 minutes, and it's already up to 8%. If it keeps going up at this rate, I'm just going to wait until it gets back to 10%, and then we'll pass him and stay at a medium speed. I also wanted to point out, you can see the average watt hours per mile here is now down to 313, where before it was up like 385, even 400, and you can see how high that line was. And then it's now dropped down, and I'm drafting behind this motorhome guy still, and you can see the consumption has dropped dramatically because of that. If we look back over the trip, it's still estimating 8%. So I'm still drafting him for a little bit longer. All right, we made it. We're down to 10% estimated arrival. And so we're going to be turning off on the highway in 21 miles. So we followed this guy for 25 miles or so. We have another 71 miles to go. He's been generally keeping us going about 55 to 57 miles per hour. Incidentally, it's 60 degrees outside, but that's pretty irrelevant. And we're at 43% battery. So I'm going to speed up, I think, to probably 70 miles per hour. We'll leave this guy behind, and we will see how the battery does from here. And this is what the energy graph looks like for the past 30 miles, and most of that was following that motorhome. So you can see it made quite a big difference. We're going to be turning off to go to Pecos in 5 miles to give you an update there. One thing I wanted to point out here is I pulled up on my cell phone the Windy website. This is windy.com, and you can see that orangish yellow area. We are hitting a pretty bad headwind is what's going on. That's why this leg of the journey is so, we've had to slow down so much. I've changed it here so you can see it's 58 degrees and 24 miles per hour, 20 miles per hour. So it keeps moving around a little bit, but quite high. So that explains the rough range that we've had on this lake. So we should have charged a little bit more if we had checked the windy.com website. So my bad, but we'll be okay. We just had to go a little slower. You can see here we are now half an hour away from Pecos. We've dropped 1%, but that's totally acceptable. We're still going 70 miles per hour on this road. I think I could potentially start going a little faster because the closer we get to our destination, the more comfortable I am with that prediction. I can show you over here too. On my phone, the dot there shows the general area that we were driving previously, and the wind is currently at 7, but a second ago it was at 17. Now it's at 18. You can see there in the corner. So it's clear that we were experiencing significant headwinds, and that's why we were having such a hard time. And it's going to just get worse up at Pecos here, so we're going to have to charge extra for sure. So I just took over control driving, the steering anyway, so I turned off the auto steer, and I can definitely feel the wind hitting us from the side pretty strongly. It's probably gusting 25 or 30 miles per hour right now. You can see down here that we are at 6% battery, and it's estimating arrival at 5% battery. I've sped up. Well, I was going 70, and then I went through construction. As you can see, I'm still in it, but I've gone ahead and just stayed here at 60 miles per hour. It's 58 degrees outside. So we're going to be arriving in 5 miles or 12 minutes at our destination. I suspect we'll probably get there with closer to 4% battery, because to me 5 miles will take more than 1% in these conditions. If I look here at the consumption graph, you can see we're currently at 368 watt hours per mile over the last 30 miles. You can see that's been projecting pretty consistently. It is projecting 13 miles of range, and we have 4.5 more miles to go. So we'll get there, no problem, but it is definitely a tight one. This is the second time I've seen some Charge America chargers on this trip, but we're going to the superchargers over this way. All right, we're pulling in here to some much needed superchargers. Hallelujah.
Another 3%.
Oh, yeah. Another 3%er in one day. Wow, that's not terribly normal for us, but that's why we monitor the energy graph. Okay, The segment of driving from Ozona, Texas to Pecos, Texas was 2 hours and 27 minutes, or 161 miles, and our efficiency was 72.7% efficient, or 416 watt hours per mile, which is quite a bit better than our previous segment, and I would attribute that to drafting behind a motorhome for 25 minutes, only going 55 miles per hour. And so if you ever notice that all of a sudden it looks like the estimated arrival percentage has gotten too low, just slow down and you'll most likely make it just fine. We had a little bit of elevation change, but really not a ton of difference between the start and end point, but in between you'll see we did do a bit of climbing. But really the biggest issue was this over here, 15.4 miles per hour of wind. I guess this is probably an average over that distance, but looking at the Windy app, it varied quite a bit throughout that segment and went as high as 25 and as low as like 5. All right, we're plugged in. The kilowatts are ramping up. Let's see what this peaks at today. All right, looking good. 127 might be our peak. Oh, 128. All right. 129. Okay, that's about the most that we can expect out of this car. It might get to 130, but I'm going to get going. So we'll let this charge for about half an hour, and then we'll probably stay a little bit longer. Oh, 130. We got up to the max. I'm going to let this charge extra because of obviously the terrible headwind, so we'll be here for a little while. So it's windy, all right. We put the kids' coats on, and they're keeping their hoods on, trying to get out of the wind. And we're kind of just doing laps around the gas station here, getting the kids running around, waiting for the car to charge. Super windy, so we're gonna have to charge extra long, that's for sure. One thing's for sure, going on road trips in general is all about creating memories, and sometimes they're not as pleasant. Your hair's in your face. But hopefully you can make them into as positive of memories as possible. And in this case, this wasn't a big deal. It's just cold. The girls are tired though. Lydia keeps asking if we're at the hotel yet. We still have like another 4 hours to go. Here's the car here. I'm gonna go check on it, but I think it's probably going to estimate about 15 more minutes of charging, and it's going to take longer than that to get up full enough. The other white Model X made it. They also had to slow down in order to get here. They have a 100D, we have an 85D, but because theirs is the X, our range is actually pretty similar, I suspect. It kind of depends on if theirs is the Raven model, I'm not sure. Claire, let's check the car. Just 1 second. Alright. I'm filming a time lapse of this one. So yeah, 20 minutes is what it's estimating. We're at 41%, 64 kilowatts. It's kind of low on the kilowatts, but I guess that's maybe normal for 41%. So yeah, we'll just keep wandering around. Alright, the car's done charging enough. We're still going to be heading into some strong wind. You can see here we are at 81% battery, and we're down to 30 kilowatts charge rate. Looking over here at the car, you can see we are at we're going to be arriving in Van Horn, Texas at 31%, which should be more than enough. So we're going to get going. Teslafy shows that we were charging there for a total of 1 hour and 5 minutes, and we went from 3% to 83% battery. arriving here at Van Horn, Texas. You can see over here that we'll be getting there in about 4 minutes. And you can see we're arriving with 24% battery. At one point it had dropped as low as 20% briefly, and then came up to 24. When we left our prior stop, it was estimating 30%. So we lost about 6% due to the headwind. The headwind has reduced though over time, and so that's why it increased in its arrival estimate. The drive from Pecos, Texas to Van Horn was an hour and 12 minutes, or 91.86 miles driven, and we had the worst efficiency that we've seen on this trip yet at 59.6%, or 508 watt hours per mile. One part of that is that the elevation gain is starting to increase. We're at 1500 elevation change, but over here is the biggest issue probably is the headwind at 20.2 miles per hour. Now, because I had charged excess over here at Pecos, Texas, I wasn't having to compromise on our speed. I just set the autopilot to 80 miles per hour, and we just got a lower efficiency rating. It has plenty of power to push through that wind. However, keep in mind, like if I had slowed down, in theory, there is a probably more efficient speed to go. It's a little bit fuzzy as to what that is, especially when there's a headwind. From my prior research before this trip, about 75 miles per hour is a pretty efficient speed to drive versus the time it takes to charge. But we tended to like to be cooped up in the car a little bit less, and so I just blasted through, and then the kids can play in the hotels where we're charging, because most of these superchargers are at hotels or somewhere that we can hang out, and that's a little bit more pleasant. All right, we arrived with 23% battery, so I'm gonna go get us plugged in. We've been plugged in here for a little while. You can see our estimated arrival percentage is 25%. And if we look at the supercharging information, we are at 86% on the battery, 23 kilowatt charge rate. We charged to up to 25 estimated arrival because if you look here at windy.com, the wind is generally between 11 and 15 miles per hour. Now that's in Van Horn where we are, and I checked it along the route, and it varies a little bit, of course, but it's generally a headwind of at least 10 miles per hour. On the last leg of the trip, we found that the battery was pulled down from 30 to 20 and then went back up to about 24 ultimately. So we lost about that much percentage from the headwind, and in this case we're going to be experiencing the same thing probably. So we're going to get started now, and then we'll be getting to our hotel in El Paso, Texas. That supercharger stop in Van Horn, Texas was right off of a hotel, which was convenient. We just walked in and hung out in the lobby of the hotel and watched some TV and stuff. That was an hour and 2 minutes that we charged there. We went from 23% to 87% battery. And that is generally what I recommend not doing, meaning generally it's better to arrive at a lower state of charge so that you can charge and get more energy in a shorter amount of time, because the charge rate is higher at a lower state of charge. But in this case, because we're protecting ourselves from the headwind, we kind of overcompensated in this case and arrived at 23%, but we just wanted to make sure we didn't have any problems along the way. All right, we are pulling into El Paso, or rather we've been in El Paso for a while, but it's a big city, so we're driving through it. You can see here we're about to arrive at our hotel. We're going to be arriving with 17% battery. And so I would say my learning from today has been that when it gets really windy, it tends to drop 10 or maybe 13%, and then it will actually level out and it goes less than that. The drive from Van Horn to El Paso was an hour and 47 minutes, or 132 miles, and we drove at 72% efficiency, or 415 watt hours per mile. When we got there, this was to the hotel, I unloaded the family and their stuff, and then I headed to the supercharger that was just north a few minutes. You can see 7 minutes of driving right here, and that was only 4 miles. So that's the two different trips listed right here. We are now at the El Paso supercharger. I'm getting 92 kilowatts, and it is estimating an hour and 10 minutes to get full, which I won't do. I'll probably go closer to 90% tonight. What ended up happening is we arrived at our hotel, which booking.com had said had a destination charger, and it does not. So I notified the clerk. He looked it up and verified that indeed it was mislisted, so he's going to get that fixed. But unfortunately for us, we were already there and the kids were tired, so we went ahead and just booked the room, and I dropped off everyone and the stuff, and then drove up here to the supercharger to get charged up, which is of course important to do when you arrive at a destination rather than the next morning, because the battery will cool overnight and it won't charge as fast in the morning. And so I've driven up here. It's 9:17 p.m., so that's not too bad, although Central Time, it's 10:17. We had the time change. We're in Mountain Time now, so it's a little bit kind of late. Incidentally, I'm finding that there's a Holiday Inn Express and a Hampton Inn behind me, so we could have come up here and just booked hotels here instead. I wasn't sure if they would have cancellation fees at the other place, and then also they're like double the price here, so for what it's worth. So anyway, I found today our learnings was with wind. We had not really experienced as much headwind on prior trips as we did today, and so it caught us a little unawares on that first leg where we had to go as slow as 55 miles an hour, drafting a motorhome to kind of build back our buffer, and we got back up to 10% from 5 or less. And then we had to drive relatively slowly after that, about 70 miles per hour, until we got to the next charger. And then at that charger, we had to charge for a little longer. As you saw, we charged up to, I think it was about 30%. And that way we were able to have plenty of room to head into the wind. And at that point, I was then going about 80 miles per hour, and we arrived, it dipped as low as 20, and then we ended up arriving with 24%, meaning that the computer had estimated that we would arrive there with 30% when we departed, and we actually arrived with 24%. So the headwind took out about 6% of the battery. And then from there, we charged up to an estimated arrival percentage of 25%, and it dipped as low as 12, and then we ended up arriving here with 17. I found that in the beginning part of a leg of a journey, when you've just left the charger, it tends to fluctuate more wildly, and then as you've traveled over the distance, it tends to solidify. So for what it's worth. So in that case, we lost about 8% of the battery to headwind, but I was going 85 miles an hour most of the time. So that probably explains the little bit of a difference there. So lesson learned, pay attention to the windy.com app or website or app, and take note if there is a significant headwind that you'll need to charge longer, and potentially alter your route if needed, if your battery can't handle it. I was at the El Paso supercharger for an hour and 17 minutes and took the battery from 15% up to 91%. Now that's kind of a long charge, just like the rest of them today had been, but obviously not having the family in the car, it was easy for me just to sit there and watch YouTube videos, and I wanted to get the battery charged up while it was still warm. It's not a good idea to do it the next morning. You'll have a very slow charge rate. So I got that up to 91%, and then I drove back down to the hotel, and that took the battery down just a little bit, so it sat at around 90% battery overnight. Now down here, this shows us our entire route for the day, so this purple line shows where we drove. Zooming in here, we started in Temple, Texas, and a better route planner had originally had us coming down this Interstate 35 right here and hitting up a supercharger in San Antonio, and then coming back up on Interstate 10. But when we were here in Temple, the car's navigation told us just to go straight across on this route. So we did that, and it ended up working, albeit because of the headwind, we ended up arriving with only 3% battery, which was a little on the tight side, but I slowed down enough and it worked just fine. And then we continued on here to Ozona, and then normally we would have stopped in Fort Stockton and then just continued on to Van Horn, but the in-software navigation in the car said that it was offline for some reason, so we actually had to charge extra here in Ozona and then go all the way up here to Pecos, Texas, which was a bit of a tangent, and that's kind of annoying. So that made our day a little bit longer between that and the headwinds. Definitely we ended up getting in a little bit later than we had anticipated, but not a ton later, so that's good. And then here in El Paso is where we stayed the night. I kind of wish that we had gone ahead and gotten a hotel up here where the supercharger is. The hotel that we ended up stopping at was right around in this area, and you can see I took this perimeter road here and got to the supercharger up here. The supercharger was in a nicer part of town for sure. This area down here was not terribly nice. It was a lot cheaper. It was about half the price as of these hotels up here. But I don't know. I maybe would have stayed up here instead. It would have been a lot more convenient. Now, looking up at the overall trip stats for the entire day, we can see here that there's a couple of miscellaneous stats up here you can look at. But the drives, we drove 7 times, a total of 658 miles. We used up 960 rated miles, almost 961. So the total efficiency for the day was 68.5. So definitely the wind. We drove for 9 hours and 18 minutes, and we used up 290 kilowatt hours, and that's 441 watt hours per mile for the total day. We stopped at 5 superchargers along the way, and we added 271 kilowatt hours, and we added 915 rated miles throughout the day. And then for time charging, we charged for a total of 5 hours and 15 minutes, which was definitely one of our longest days of charging. I mean, if you look at the time driven versus time charging, that's like half of the time driving was just charging almost. It's actually a little bit worse than that. So the wind killed us on this day. And this was where a Model 3 would have performed really well with a long-range battery, for instance, a little bit higher efficiency, but more importantly, the charge rate on the Model 3 stays higher for longer, and if we had a long-range battery, it would have had that much more range. And then if we had had version 3 superchargers on this whole route, then we would have been able to save a lot of time today. I hope this video has been informative for you to see what a Tesla can do, even an older one that's now 5 years old. If you're thinking of purchasing a brand new Tesla, feel free to use my Tesla referral code that is in the description below this video. If you have any questions about anything that I've experienced, feel free to post them in the comments down below, and I will be sure to get back with you and answer those questions. If you are going to install solar on your home, you can also use the Tesla referral code for that. I'm going to be continuing to post a new video every Friday going forward as long as I can. Definitely have a lot more time right now. We're not really going anywhere because of the quarantine, and so I have some video footage pre-recorded luckily, and I'll be continuing to go through our ventures. After this video today, we're going to be going from El Paso, Texas to Phoenix, Arizona, and we'll be there for 2 days, and then we'll be going from Phoenix, Arizona up to the Salt Lake City area back home. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.